Wait a second, who are we missing? Oh, just Sarah. And we want to excuse President Hacken that she won't be in attendance today. So Superintendent Farnsworth.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the board gathering. Senior leadership team as well. We have a couple members that are going to join us a little bit later. And we have a couple members of our leadership team that are out of town. We excuse them as well. We have a couple items that we wanted to cover and discuss tonight. We wanted to remind the board or update the board on full day kindergarten, what that legislation entails and the funding entails, and then some current thinking in terms of how we would implement and roll that out, maybe some constraints or some considerations that we are making. And then after that, we'll talk, open up some time to discuss fees. On the agenda tonight is the approval of our fee schedule, and we'll invite Rob to participate in both those, and we'll kind of work the full day kindergarten as a team, and he will guide us through the fee discussion, and then if we have some time, we'll do some board governance. Rob recently presented to board leadership throughout the state on Robert's Rules of Order. And so we thought it would be good to invite him to kind of refresh us on those rules. Appreciate his diligence in understanding that and applying that and guiding us as our parliamentarian. So we will start with a discussion of full day kindergarten. And let's start with kind of the legislative process, Rob, and where we're at.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent. And thanks to all of my team that's here. We'll excuse Jason.
Behind you.
Did he make it? I turned around like 2 minutes ago and he
I
just
thought you
quit.
were pre-excusing him for something
Yeah,
he was going to say.
well, I probably should do that too. But anyway, I think we've got everyone but Derek. Is Derek? Did he slip in under the table somewhere? But just great people. It's a privilege to work with. We also have Matt Dugdale. Matt is going to share just an update from our bond transaction. His team has put together a summary for the board members. Just had a really successful bond sale, and kudos to Matt. He's an important part of our business team and a dear friend, so I'm grateful that he's here as well. With that, let's jump into full day K. I took a look at Jordan School District, what they said about it. I called my friend from Canyon, Susan Edwards, and said, hey, what did you tell the Canyons board about it? And tried to capture some thoughts from everybody, as well as our view of what the legislature did when they passed HB 477. HB 477 was a unique bill, and I had to screenshot this for the board. It's very rare in any bill to have multiple co-sponsors. But when you have nearly 24 or more co-sponsors of a bill, it means the legislators really, really want this to pass. And so there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, there was amendments, there were concerns raised, all sorts of issues. This also is a bipartisan bill. You'll note several Democratic co-sponsors here as well, to our Republican sponsor, both in the House and in the Senate. But just a lot of support. And this has been worked on for many years, and this was the year to pass it. It replaces the old optional extended day K program, combines that with some new resources to create the full day kindergarten program. And again, I could probably turn to Michelle Stevenson, some of our elementary supervisors, and you may want to ask them some questions here. But there's been a lot of work that's gone into this over the years, and I think we're well positioned, although I am concerned, and we'll highlight at the tail end just a couple of things for us to think about. But I think we're well positioned for an incremental advancement of all-day K options for our families and our students. A couple of key points from the legislation. Each LEA must decide when and where to offer the full-day K options. That was something that we worked on pretty heavily is we didn't want this to be a mandate for every school, just because some schools would not have the space available to make that happen, nor would some districts or LEAs be able to acquire all of the educators necessary to make that happen. Those were some of the concerns: space and the talent that we seek to hire in every school relative to our certified staff. Second thing, interesting, we've got the full day option, however, LEAs shall, and it's not a may, but a shall provide a half day option as well. This is one of the things that gives me a little concern because we have to maintain both. Again, as I've reached out to a couple of my colleagues and asked for their input, they've done some surveys for half day option versus those parents that want full day. And one of the districts said they've only had 16 parents request the half day option. Well, if I have 16, that's not enough students for even one section. However, those 16 are dispersed throughout the geography of the district. So how then do we accomplish bullet point number 2? And that district will have some challenges, as will we, as we look to implement this legislation. The third bullet point is another concern that both Jordan and Canyons raised with their boards. I want to just reference Jordan's. I thought their comment was really quite... I called Mike Anderson. Most of our board members know Mike. And I called to just wanted to talk to Mike. He's an amazing administrator, great educator. I wanted some color commentary. He's always got something fun or something good to say. So when I couldn't get a hold of Mike, I just defaulted to his notes that he shared with me. And he said this in his notes. Quote, more information from USB is needed before making decisions on locations, unquote. And so the concern here is we don't meet with the state board until the middle of April. I believe it's the 17th and 18th. Superintendent and I will be in meetings with state board where a lot of the details from the legislation now has been worked through by USB staff. Guidance has been drafted, and that information is then shared with superintendents and business administrator. So some of these things that we're going to share, it's we still need some additional guidance from the state board staff. Number 4, I already mentioned that it repeals the former OEK grant, combines funds. And then the last one, this is something that I don't know that people thought about, but when you have a half-day session, and let's say we have one full-time educator teaching 2 sessions, our ratio is 23 students to 1. Now that's not always what happens, right? But that's our funding ratio. And we generate 0.55 per student. When I go to 1.0, I lose the half for the morning student and the half for the student in the afternoon. So the estimated potential, if all of our students went to full day, there would be a loss of revenue to Alpine School District. We're estimating just over $1.2 million. At the same time, we need to expand and hire additional teachers in order to make this happen. And that's just something, again, I think it will work itself out over time. But we want to be prudent so that we don't overpromise and then underdeliver.
Rob, I had a question on number
Fire
2.
away. Yeah.
So that's basically saying that our district, we need to make sure that that's always an option, is to have half day. So if my kid, if my school is, everyone else is signed up for full day, and there's one parent that wants half day, it doesn't mean that that school has to provide that. What that means is the district, we have other schools that have that, and they'd be able to go to that school.
That's a great comment, and that's my understanding as well. As I talked with, again, a couple of my colleagues, that was their understanding. But the third bullet, we need to just verify that with some guidance from the state, who will pass the rules and administer that general supervision and audit for our compliance with those rules. And we just make sure that we check in with what they have to say. Yeah, Board Member Wilson.
I know that we have some internal criteria for placement of
You do?
K. Are you anticipating these are additional criteria that USB?
I expect some additional clarification and criteria from USB.
And that's coming like in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right?
I'm hopeful that it's coming in like 2 or 3 weeks. Because again, this is something we're planning for. I mean, again, supervisors will tell you, we've got principals that we posted and then we've kind of told them to hold, we've got to verify. We need to get educators hired, we need to know where we're going, and I'll share the plan that we have as of now, but we also are looking at some of the criteria we're establishing, whether it's KEEP or Acadians, and we're trying to locate those based on need. And again, I'll share a little bit of that in the next slide, but we need to make sure that we see what the state is requiring before I can say definitively this is it.
And you think our legislators are not aware of the 1.2 million?
I think they are aware of the change to the full day option. It's what we asked for. But I just want people to understand that there is a difference.
Okay.
There is a difference, and it'll work itself out.
And they're trying to bring that funding alignment with the other
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
first through 12th grade.
Yeah.
A student is AWP or.
So we're just gonna have to eat that.
Yeah.
So remember when before the legislative session happened, and we're thinking we were gonna get this much, and then after the legislative session, how much did we end up?
The additional was 25 million in all day K, and then they combined the OEK grant, which was 36.7, I believe, statewide. So it's about 60 plus million. Michelle, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask a question about number 2. So I know a lot of districts have all-day kindergarten right now in their district, and we have some in our district too. And we did pattern it after Washington School District, where if a kid just wanted to go half day, that they would go half day, and then their parents, they could go home. And so we changed our curriculum, so our core was in the morning, and then more interventions in the afternoon and stuff like that. Are you saying now, like, we have to offer a half day in every school and full days?
It's a great question. I have the exact same question.
Okay.
Until I get number 3, I don't know that I can definitively answer that. I think what the team's done is absolutely the right thing to do. But the concern was, if it says shall offer a half-day option, we have to be able to get that guidance from the state. What does that mean? Is it like core is in the morning, or is it the full experience compressed to a half day? Those are some things that, again, I think we just need to get that additional guidance. It's a great question.
So I hope that people like Michelle can give some feedback to them now so that they're looking at the realities of what we're having to do.
Okay, great question. Let's move on from this. Our plan is we're going to go green. So, I love green. It's one of my favorite colors. I wish I had more of it. 55 classrooms and 13 schools. We would like to move beyond that. You can see some of the yellow that we've identified as our second tier of priority. But right now, our plan is to basically expand into that green area. And I took this right off of one of the spreadsheets our supervisors shared with me, so I think that's the current plan, is to make sure that we expand to about 55 additional classrooms and 13 schools.
Are you gonna share this slide deck with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I already got it.
You've already got
Oh,
it.
is it?
Yes.
Yep, it's on your email. It came about 2:15 or 2:20, if I remember right before I was able to slip into negotiations. But anyway, this is kind of where we're at. And again, kudos to everybody who has worked on the plan. There's still a lot of additional needs. I won't talk about the research, won't talk about the outcomes for kids, but we have space issues, we have staffing issues that we need to work through. And so going to this step, I think, is the right place. And if we can expand beyond, we'll look at expanding, whether that's next year, the year after, or 2 years after. We'll expand as we have space and teachers available.
the one OEK that's there, is that kind of grandfathering in, or is that gonna be?
Yeah, that's a good question for our elementary supervisors.
It's Pony Express, because Pony Express doesn't have the space and they've had OEK. So we don't know exactly what that would look at. It will depend on how they rule at the state board, but we would like to continue the service that we have been providing. The other schools that have had OEK are in the green and would receive it, so
It's just Pony, okay.
just
that makes
Pony
sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I may have just responded to an email on that today.
So Rob, just to also clarify, I know we've talked about some of the challenges with capital pieces as far as we have some schools that because of their enrollment, doing full day K is complicated. I'll just say that. Another dynamic is that when we are essentially doubling, when we're taking like half days and making them full days, we're essentially doubling. We're also talking about increased costs in schools that we can, and we do have the space of things like desks and chairs and cubbies and all the things that you actually have to do to make a classroom function. That it's not just the walls and the flooring, that it's also that all the things that go into that. So that's another additional cost, that if we are doubling the amount of classrooms, then we have to double the amount of things in classrooms.
Or we have to move resources within the school to accommodate where we can, and in some schools we cannot accommodate, which goes back to there will be some locations that will not have a full day option because we don't have either space or the materials, the equipment that we need. And some of our larger schools will struggle with both space and other things that are needed to make that happen. Yep, great point. Thank you. Stating the obvious, master of the obvious. Okay, a couple of things we're working on right now, and again, our challenge is we're trying to hit a moving target, and our window for getting the best teachers and really supporting our schools it's creating a challenge for our supervisors, our schools, our HR team, because we're dragging our feet just a little bit. And I've shared with you some of the reasons. Currently our staff, Jason and Derek, they met, was it yesterday? You and Derek met, maybe he was meeting right now out in the hall. But we talked briefly about utilizing or creating a consistent metric with assumptions, so that we could model that and try to have a FTE adjustment based on that green implementation and get that to our supervisors for review, and then ultimately to our HR team to release those FTEs for hire as quickly as possible. And so we're going to utilize approximately 95%. We'll select full day. Again, this is back to Board Member Beeson's question. I don't know what that is. We have done some work looking at our OEK data. Appreciate the supervisors my team reached out to. They shared some data. We've taken a look at some other data. We have some data from Washington. We had some from Salt Lake School District that has full day options. But we're trying to come up with the likelihood of what parents will select as far as full day versus half day. I think that will change based on geography in our community. Also some that are socioeconomic variables or demographic might change. But that's what we're striving to hit, is around a 95% assumption to then calculate what the FTEs might be. We're also going to review our half-day options, number of students with that, then update our FY24 FTE allocations based on this metric. We'll review it and vet it, and then once we feel good, we'll be ready to open up that hiring. Again, we said yes, and then we said, oh wait, let's pause for a minute, and as soon as we can get to that, we will. We're hopeful to have that done this week. And then once we receive that additional guidance from the state board here in a couple weeks, we'll check that versus what we have, and then if we need to make some tweaks, we'll make some tweaks and keep you informed. That's kind of where we're at as of today.
Just along those lines, I know there's some principals that have like interviews this week, so they would be excited if they were notified on what to do soon.
So, as best as I can with the legislative bill, some of the requirements, some where we're at as a team, the plan to expand. Anything I'm missing from what we've got? Jace? Supervisors, anything that there are big holes or concerns that you have in what we shared? Okay, that's all they can.
Questions from board members about full-day kindergarten, all-day kindergarten? Maybe we should decide on whether we call it full-day or all-day or not that day.
So I think this is a good point, because I think sometimes there's a sense of, well, I just need to advocate with my principal or advocate with my board member or advocate with certain people in the chain. The reality is it's a USBE dynamic, it's a hiring dynamic, it's a capital dynamic. There's a lot of different things, and then there's a financial dynamic. So even when you hear like fully funded all-day K or full-day K, fully funded full-day K, wow, it's a tongue twister. Yes, but there's like an asterisk on all of that. And so I think that's a good thing for our public to understand, that it's not just, you know, I just need to write a letter or complain or whatever, that there is a lot of complicated pieces that we're trying to accommodate as many students as possible based on funding options, space options, working with USBE, and that is not an easy solution.
We believe it is an academic benefit to those young people. We are fully supportive of full-day kindergarten and think it will be a great enhancement to student learning. It's just how quickly can we prudently develop that out so that we are able to offer that. And I appreciate Rob has mentioned supervisors looking at testing data to see where there is a greater need and being able to equitably distribute that across the district. So it's just going to take a little bit of time to get to that point where we can offer that to all students who desire it, because it is something that we do want to provide and believe in it. We're grateful for the legislative support of it and for the flexibility to allow us to grow as we are able to and expand this opportunity. But I sense from the board the full support moving forward as we have the means, resources to do so.
I think just parents should know that they have, even now, the right to, you know, take their child out at the halfway point if that's something they want to do. And anecdotally, that's happened in my cluster, where a parent felt that their child was not mature enough to stay an entire day, and that's an option that's available right now. I had a question. I know that we have a private sector person that sometimes comes to our board meetings, and I think it's about preschool, correct? And the competition between our preschools and the private sector. Is there also a private sector kindergarten that's out there? I mean,
Yes.
that can be, that is available to our parents for those areas where we're not able to provide this service, because it is an important service.
It is a hefty price tag when you go the private route, so.
Have we talked about, we have preschools at some schools. Have we talked about maybe prioritizing K over preschool, or are they generally in areas where we don't need the classrooms?
We have talked about a great many things, and what we strive to do for our public is support our students and families and provide a comprehensive array of services to meet their academic needs wherever they are, and move them forward. Whether it's preschool, there is data on preschool. There is also private preschools that we have heard from, but there are some absolute needs for preschool age kids, whether that's with an IEP, whether that's with a Title I program, or whether that's with a tuition program. And so we do that. But is that one of the things we talked about? Yes, we have. Any more detail other than that? I know that's something we've talked about. Any other comments or things that you share?
I think for larger schools, just something to consider, and Vicki spoke a little bit about this, is we don't instead of one there, just to collaborate with them, but that is an option as well.
That's what we're doing at Pony. At Pony Express, we would probably be using that option since OEK doesn't technically exist anymore. So it would be something like that. And it would be great if we could move it up to 2. And we've tried to look at not disadvantaging students whose schools are closing too. We are providing options. Any school that's closing, we're providing an option for them to still have full day kindergarten. So they're not disadvantaged by that.
And I think the sheer volume of it too, like there are some schools that have 7 and 8 sessions of kindergarten. So that's 4 classrooms. To go from 4 classrooms to 8 is a heavy lift, but if there's a way we can go from 4 to 6 or play with it a little bit, but trying to find, like, doubling the amount of space for that many kindergartens, I mean, it's schools worth of buildings.
Yes.
So I think the supervisors have done a fabulous job of answering all my questions prior, but I will just state that I've heard from a large number of parents who would love at some point to just see a district-wide list of which school, because if you're not in the community where we've talked about this, but just for those who may be listening, that if we can share that with them at some point, that would be appreciated.
District-wide list of where we're going to place full-day kindergarten?
Like where the first wave is. So we've got some parents that whether it's DLA or other ALL, other programs, and they're kind of trying to figure out where they're putting their families. And so if all day K was offered, that would probably change a little bit of their plans.
So where demand exceeds our ability to provide, and we're doing that according to need, or is there some other lottery?
No, it's not a lottery.
It's not lottery. Okay, that's good.
Our criteria has been looking at the KEEP test, the Acadians test, entry level literacy versus exit level. So when they entered as a kindergarten cohort, did they go up or did they go down? Because we have some great kindergarten teams. And then we looked at putting them in all areas, like all 5 of us would have some, and it's not equal, but so we based it on that, and we also looked at space, because space is a big issue. It seems like there's one more.
There's one other variable.
And then the hiring pool.
Yeah, the hiring. Being able to hire the teachers. So we don't know how many teachers. We're hopeful we can fill all the green with great teachers. You don't want to put a bad teacher. You want great teachers, so we are limiting the number to see what it is. And the sooner we can hire, the better the pool. And in future years, when we aren't facing other circumstances, then we may be able to open the hiring sooner. And once teachers know that that's an option, that's going to be better too.
Any further questions? Thank you, Rob. Thank you, supervisors, for your support of that and your patience as we get some of this ironed out, hopefully in the next couple weeks. Anything else on that?
Transition?
Okay. Fee schedules.
Okay, we talked about it last board meeting for the first public meeting. This is public meeting number 2, but we'll have another review here later. This is where, if you have other things that you need to slip out for, it'll be okay. But if you'd like to talk about fee schedules, and I brought, B is going to do most of the talking here. She's fabulous. We love having her on our leadership team. And just kudos to, as I recognized in our last meeting, each of our accounting team members, Julia, Jana, Sherilyn, Robert for his help on this. I think we've gathered a lot of feedback in what we shared last go around in generalities. We're going to now talk about some of the details, and you'll be able to see with the strikeouts and some of the red, some of the things that I referred to and talked about generally, but B will now talk about the nuts and bolts and the details of it. So with that, I'll drive and B will talk.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. I think every year when we look at this, we think we've got it, and then we come up to another year with evolving needs and wants, and so we will be showing a lot of the strikeouts and show you how we got to the fee schedule that we're proposing for you tonight. We're going to start with the elementary schedule. First off was a change and increase on the before and after school program from 180 to 200. That is to compensate for ballroom instructor salary increases. Ballroom instructors changing about $5 plus benefits, and then assistant instructors about $250 plus benefits. That works out to be about $20 a student, thus the 180 to 200. The next change on the elementary schedule was just wording, some cosmetics, ed services testing. We found that there were a lot of different testing services going on, so we just changed the wording on that and then increased it from 20 to 30 to account for different needs in those testing areas. Then we'll go to middle school. So this is where it starts getting a little bit more fun. A lot of this was cosmetics too. We really try to go between the high school and the middle school to make them kind of sync with each other. But there were some cosmetic needs. One thing that we did look at was summer school. It was showing a 75. We don't know where that number came from. It's really 25, so we adjusted that back down to 25, and it's just for 9th graders. The other thing that we added, if you scroll up a little bit, Rob, is we added East Shore fees. This is something that's being offered for 9th graders at middle schools. It's similar to what the high school has also. It's showing $100. That is for a 365-day access to East Shore online courses. They're remedial or possibilities for advancing for those courses. And for the middle schools, they may be offering a 50% discount for the middle schoolers. So in a high school, it'd be $100 for that access, but on the middle school, it may be. We're not at that point where they've made that decision yet, but we did put $100 just in case they need to go to that. The next thing, we're going to go to the high school strikeout schedule next, because this was kind of the biggest thing, and the purple that you see was one of the last revamps we did. So we thought we were done, and then we hit a request that came up, and it caused us to do all these purple changes. So it just shows you that we were really trying to make it clean before the end. But I just want to kind of back up and think the fee schedule is a starting point for spend plans. That's where all our secretaries start when they're doing the spend plans, and our coaches and our administrators. And one way when a secretary looks at this, sometimes we'll get calls saying, where do I pull this off? Because I have to start with this to go to the spend plan. And so we try to help them navigate this whole schedule to use them to help them prepare their spend plans effectively. So one thing that we do as trainers is we start with this program listing of all the programs in a high school, a secondary school, elementary school. And in this, especially for secondaries, it lists what type of program it is, either general, curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. And then we have our fee schedules that go with those sections. Basically, you'll see fees for all students, those are general, and then you've got your curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, and then some miscellaneous. But it helps the secretary say, okay, I'm looking at a program, what is it? Now I go here and I see what I have to work with, and I can't go out of that bubble. Well, right before we found these purple changes that we need to make, we got a request from a secondary school for a feeder, some fees to go through feeders for their spend plans. And they were pretty high for a feeder program, and it really got our attention. So we thought, how are they doing this? So we went and we started looking, and we, as a team, we thought this is a loophole. We saw how they were doing it, and we need to close this loophole. And so that's why we really came to revamp a lot of this at the last minute. So what happened was, if you look up in miscellaneous, Rob, if you'll go back up a little bit, you'll see that feeder program is listed under miscellaneous right there. There's also camps, field trips, and overnight trips. Now on this schedule, feeders are listed as extracurricular. So in our minds, we were thinking feeder program, you use $400. But in theirs, they've been trained to use extracurricular. So they went to the extracurricular section and then also the miscellaneous section. So we saw that they were jumping between sections and being able to charge more fees than a fee schedule really was intended to allow them to charge, if that makes sense. So what we did as a team is we pulled out those things from the miscellaneous section completely and added 2 new sections, one just for feeders and one just for camps, competitions and trip fees. And so we find that, and maybe they'll find a way around this too, but we really feel like we've closed the loophole now because of the things that I'll show you next. The proposed changes, so it really does take that one feeder program, allows for really we've allowed for middle school feeders to charge $400 and high school feeders to charge $600. And then they are not allowed to use this camp, competitions, and trips section. And the miscellaneous section has just become purely miscellaneous things. So if we hop over to the high school clean thing, you'll see how much cleaner this looks, because those three camps, competitions, trip fees used to be in curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. Now they have their own section. The double asterisk has a note at the bottom that says camps, clinics, trip fees may be in addition to program fees listed above. And so the curricular fees, the co-curricular fees has that double asterisk. But if you scroll back up, sorry Rob, I'm really getting all over the place. The feeder does not have that double asterisk for extracurricular feeders. It also has added verbiage to say may not exceed 600 per program. On the middle school it says may not exceed 400. So between the extra verbiage, pulling everything out of miscellaneous and making it its own section, we really feel like we closed that loophole for this. So, yeah.
When you say feeder, is that anything but baseball, or what?
It's all of them now. It's lots of sports have feeders. You got wrestling, you got volleyball, you got baseball, basketball. Feeders have kind of exploded as far as it used to just be baseball, and now it's a lot of other things.
So are you saying that, for example, for marching band, if you had a high school and it was $600 to participate in the program, but if it's in 9th grade, they would be paying $400, not the $600?
Right.
Yeah. And so the school would have to come up with whatever
Just be aware of that difference, yeah.
And do you foresee that's going to affect?
I don't think that.
Ninth graders would be that.
When they're ninth
Sorry,
graders,
ninth
they're
grade? Oh.
accessing the high school.
Oh, you're
fee.
right, yes.
Okay,
Sorry,
that's what I
it's
was
just,
wondering.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
There are some feeder programs that are just in the middle schools, but if they are accessing the high schools, yeah, then it would be.
And the other question I had, and Rob, you'll have to remind me, because I thought 3-4 years ago, they came down and said, with some of these fees, that like locker fees and the library fees, and that we couldn't charge those. Now, I know that we have the school waivers, and let's say my student doesn't even use a locker. I mean, I know it's only a $2 fee, but do they have to pay the fee if they're not using the locker?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you. That's right.
That locker fee has become more of an optional fee for a
Okay.
lot of the schools because the students weren't using
And
it.
the library fee, same thing, like if they access the library or need the library, then they can pay the fee, but if they don't foresee that they'll go to the library, do they need to pay the fee? I mean, just wondering how many of these are.
The library fee is one that is more required and consistent. The activity fee and the library fee of those three are required fees that come across to the students. If they are a waiver student, they are waived.
And that was the last question I had. If you are a student that would probably fit the criteria of having your fees waived,
Right.
and be a school waiver student, but your parents didn't fill out the paperwork, it's the end of the year. Can you go back and fill that out to not pay, or if they don't pay at the beginning, they're kind of stuck with it? How does that work?
So if you look in the policy, in the district policy, it really does say if they haven't paid all year and they fill out that waiver form on the last day of the school year,
Then they're okay.
everything's waived for that student. If they have, even in the policy, if they have paid part of that, it's not required for a school to refund what's been paid thus far, but an admin, that's a school-based decision, and they could go back and refund those fees.
Okay, just kidding, I'm not done. But, and so if you had a family that, we've got a lot of families that have, 3-4 kids and between the secondary, schools, between junior high and high school, is there like a payment plan for these people that want, so they can pay little at a time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, at no interest or anything like that. They're called ACH plans, and it's a great tool for students
What does that
to use.
stand for? Is that
ACH.
Is that
Automatic
an acronym for?
Something, what is it? Check something. I could find out for you.
We all know
Clear-
these
clearing
acronyms, but
Yeah,
sometimes.
clearing
Not
house, that's right.
everything
Automatic
falls,
clearing house,
not all
yes.
the fees fall under that. Some you still have to pay up front.
Yes. So if it's optional, you know, things like that, then those would not be included. It's really the required fees that are included in the ACH payments.
One other thing I'll note there is this right at the top of every fee schedule. Fees not to exceed printed maximums. Many schools charge less. Many programs charge less. And I think our schools, for the most part, do a pretty good job at being sensitive to our families. And so I do think our principals, our secretaries, our program directors, our coaches, they do a pretty good job to try to, within the guidelines, meet some of those needs. We do have outliers, but that's a key point in our fee schedules is these are maximums. And cleaning this up, as the team has recommended, really makes it more straightforward and I think helps achieve that fees not to exceed those maximums.
Well, and it's hard because as a board, you know, we approve these. And I mean, we're all gonna foresee, and we have foreseen, that trips are gonna be more expensive because gasoline has gone up. The trips are more expensive because groceries and feeding students on these trips are more expensive. And so, I know that there are ways to go about so they can continue on these tours and be doing these things without, and they're gonna have to up their fees, and I guess we just approve that by request, right?
An exception,
An
as
exception,
needed.
yeah.
House Bill 175 was another bill this session on school fees. It did not pass, which I think was part of some of the concerns that I know you expressed, Board Member Beeson, on that. And so we're continuing to operate until things change.
And Rob, maybe if you wouldn't mind just comment a little bit further on that, the debate that's been going on in the legislature with respect to fees and doing away with those fees, but realizing there has to be a funding source at some point. And so I think that's a little bit of the dilemma. Take away some fees, but backfill it with the funding source. And if there's not the funding source, do we hold on taking away the fees? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think the move to continue decreasing fees is there. I think there is some desire to eliminate fees, general fees and curricular fees especially. There's quite an appetite to eliminate those. This year I believe it came down to $1 priority in the ledge session. They just said we can't do it all, so we're going to do these things, and fees is going to have to wait for another day. I do think the general fees, already gone away as textbook fees, so that was this last year in '23. But I think you'll see general fees go away and curricular fees go away. Co-curricular, there's a debate on that, but that expands the price tag of the bill. So if the legislature chooses to do that, they will need to cough up some additional resources to make that happen. But I think for the most part, extracurricular fees, there is broad support to continue extracurricular fees as long as they comply with the lawsuit years ago and the guidelines that have been outlined by the state board. I think you'll see extracurricular fees stay, but I think general fees, curricular fees go away first, and then co-curriculars kind of in the middle. That's my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, anything else,
Just
Bea?
a couple little things, very minor, but graphing calculators and PE uniforms, the costs have gone up for replacing those, so we increased the graphing calculator from 20 to 30 and the PE uniforms from 20 to 25. There was also, last item was driver's ed has been increased from 160 to 200, and this is to cover for behind the wheel instructor. Pay plus benefits $25 an hour, and then also to cover some maintenance for fuel and maintenance, which is $7. So between benefits and extra pay, that's about a $40 difference per student, and so you'll see that from 160. We added retake fees on here also. It's rare that a classroom retake would happen, but to avoid having a student pay $200 over again, we just took the classroom salary and benefits and put that as $45. And in the case of a driving test retake, to cover the costs and salary costs for an instructor, that would be about $27 per school. So those were the major things.
Additional questions? or me or I. I'll just add to the driver's ed, that they requested that adjustment last year, and we said, hold, use some of the fund balance in driver's ed, then bring it back for the following year. So again, the team trying to work with our schools and that, looking at what's available, what's prudent. This request is a needed request now because we did use up some of those fund balances in driver's ed for the current year. Kudos to be, again, thanks to the whole team who's here. I appreciate these good people. They do amazing work, doing our very best to support our schools. And would recommend tonight, when we share this with you, that you adopt the fee schedule. The requirement is to adopt it by April 1st. So we're just a couple of days under that.
We have been in communication with MTech as well. They have approved theirs and sent that over so we can notice. We don't need to approve their fees, but we have a collaborative relationship with them. Board member King sits on their chair as their board now. Right?
Vice chair.
Vice chair, okay. In leadership role there. So we appreciate that relationship with them, and President Christensen sharing that with us.
And we, just for the board members, thanks Superintendent for bringing that. We've added it to all of the counselor pages on all of our schools, so it's available for all of our parents. It's out on the counselor webpage at all of our high schools.
Yeah.
So thanks
For
to,
MTech and all.
so people can see the MTech fees as well. So, okay.
Any further questions on fees? Okay. Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay, so this is where I'm going to turn back here to if there's something else and you would like to leave and go, you're welcome to do that. If you'd like to stay, I get kind of tired of listening to myself, but I know many of our DLT do as well. But, okay, let me get to the other Prezi. Where did it go? Okay, there's that. And if I can hand this out to board members. I've got some going down that way and then some going down that way. This is a little handout that I think will be helpful. A little cheat sheet, if you will. And you know, this was kind of fun. We had all of the board presidents, vice presidents, most of the superintendents down at Nebo school district offices a little while ago. And we had the best discussion. It was really fun. And so our board president, President Hacken, and superintendent thought it might be helpful for us to just go over a few of those things here with our board. And in negotiations today, Mike Gowan said, because he's the UEA parliamentarian, and our other ag teacher, which is also a parliamentarian, said, hey, if ever you need some additional parliamentary training or support, we'd be happy to come help. And I said, I just might reach out to you and have you do that. So anyway, if this isn't enough for you, we have some experts, way more expert than I. A couple of things we want to do is just continue to strengthen our protocol for conducting effective meetings. The more effective our meetings are, the more efficient the use of time, the business gets done, it gets done in a clean way, a clear manner, and we can talk about it effectively. It also helps with transparency for the public who want and need to be engaged in our processes. The final thing is it strengthens our connections with each other, and that is something that I think that all of us hope to do and strive to do. Where did it come from? Henry Martin Robert was a U.S. Army officer back Civil War time, and he put together the rule and protocol and procedure. He put it in writing, and it was basically what the Congress used. And so he did his work way back when. Some of the things I've taken from is the 12th edition of Robert's Rules. And that edition was published in September of 2020. But again, a formal way to implement protocols, procedures to get work done, and have the entire body on the same page as to what different things mean. The protocols enable assemblies of any size, small bodies of 3 up to bodies of hundreds. It gives due regard to the opinions of each and every member through their protocol. It also allows the assembly to arrive at the general will of the body as a whole. Obviously, there are individuals who don't agree with the will of the body, and we're seeing more and more of that in our federal dialogue, and even sometimes at state and local levels. But the protocols allow the body to ascertain the general will of the people. The third thing is something I really like, and that is to provide the opportunity for the maximum number of questions within the minimum amount of time. Some people like me ramble, and point of order, Scott could call on me in a DLT meeting or something like that, and I might need to adjust my thinking or shorten my comment. It also allows work to be completed regardless of what's happening outside or even oftentimes inside. There's a motion for that. There's a way to handle that as it comes up. And so those are some of the purpose or the benefits of implementing some type of Robert's Rules. I've given you a cheat sheet as well as effective ways to make motions. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that because I've got most of it covered here. But there is something I want to get into in a little more detail, and that is the idea of a substitute motion. And so I did some additional research. I'm going to pull up on my phone the actual, I thought was the very best of about 10 different colleges or assemblies and their rules. I thought it was probably the best way they framed how to deal with amending a motion and a formal substitute motion. So I'll walk that through after we go through this little cheat sheet. Motions are in order of precedence. So the ones at the top are the highest order, and they take precedent over any other motion that's on the table, is pending, etc. One thing to note, that when a motion is pending, you cannot introduce a new motion of lower precedent. So if there is a motion to end debate, I could not introduce a new motion, a new primary motion, or an amendment, because that motion has a higher order of precedent. Okay? But if there is a motion on the floor to end debate and another board member made a motion to adjourn, because it's a higher order motion, that must be dealt with first. And so adjourning effectively ends debate. So that's one thing just to keep in mind about Robert's Rules. And as I shared with superintendents and board leaders down in Spanish Fork, this can be adjusted to meet your needs. The key here is to meet your needs to effectively hear the will of the body, the most efficient use of time, and the maximum amount of input so you can ascertain the will of the body and move forward. Okay? But you can adapt this. There were 2 or 3 examples from some boards. Well, we do it this way. That's absolutely fine if that's the way you do it. Okay? But that's something that body should agree upon. Primary motion, I move that. Needs to have a second. Is debatable. Is amendable. Okay? You'll notice that there's no substitute motions here listed on the cheat sheet, because the more proper way is to amend the motion. The guidelines I wanted to share on amending a motion, and I took a picture of it because I thought it was just brilliant, and I'm happy to share this with you as well. I carry it around on my phone because sometimes when we get into a debate, I just kind of pull this out and I just look at it and said, should I interject? a board member may lean over to me and say, well, Rob, is that proper parliamentary procedure or not? But this is how you deal with amending a motion. So if an original motion is to approve full day K at 13 schools and 55 classrooms, and let's say that motion was on the floor. It was seconded. So now that motion is being debated. However, a board member says, you know, I've seen the academic research and I believe that we need to expand that option from 13 schools and 55 classrooms to 60 schools or 60 classrooms and 14 schools or 15 schools. The second motion would be proposed as an amendment. If an amendment is a small change to the original motion, the proper way of handling that is through an amendment. So, Board Member Clement says, you know, I propose an amendment to expand full day K from 13 and 55 to 15 and 60. That would be in order, and then that amendment to the motion would be debated and then acted upon.
But doesn't the original maker have to accept it?
They do not. That's one of the key things where I think we get tripped up. So an amendment inserts that new language into the original motion. Okay, and you've seen, we've done that, I think, well in a couple instances, but what trips us up is the substitute. So here is the guidelines on a substitute. When a substitute is proposed, so amending is changing minor things, but if we're changing major things, then a substitute motion is in order. The chair, when a substitute motion is made and seconded, puts the question to the body of whether or not to substitute the second motion or the substitute motion for the original motion. At that point, that's all that's being decided. The vote is a simple majority to substitute the original motion for the substitute motion. Okay? Vote is simple majority. After the vote to substitute is taken, then debate on the motion begins. So the first vote is, do we substitute this, replace it with this substitute motion or not? If that passes, then we debate the motion that's just been substituted. And that's what kind of trips us up, I think, just a little bit. Question?
So when you're having to word craft and you don't want to do a substitute, you just want to do an amendment. I think we sometimes get tripped up because we're not sure who's in charge of who's typing that language, who's taking on that task. There's some ambiguity about that.
So, and we've done that a couple of different ways. When there is an amendment or a substitute, I try to write down to capture, and oftentimes you'll hear me say, I need to make sure that I got that amendment correctly. Often the chair can then restate the amendment so that the amendment is clear. I try to write that down. Rhonda also tries to track that. So between the two of us, we've captured the amendment correctly. So then when it's reflected in your minutes, it's accurate and correct. You also had recently our legal counsel. There was an amendment made, and he said, you know, I've got that. Yep, I've captured that. Then we circle up to make sure that in the minutes, the official action of the board, we've captured the amendments properly. But we do try, when the amendments are made, we try to document, write those down to say this is what just was changed.
So the substitute motion, you need someone to make the motion and have it seconded.
Correct.
But the amendment, you don't?
You do as well.
Oh, you do as well.
Mhm.
Okay.
So again, the difference between the two, an amendment is just minor changes.
Right.
So again, Board Member Wilson's comment, if we're wordsmithing something and we want to strike the word language, and we want to insert words, that would be an amendment. So minor changes would be amendments to the original motion. But if we want to substitute really the whole thing, or there's significant changes to it, that's when a substitute motion's made. Then you vote as to whether you're going to replace that original motion with the substitute. And if the vote is a simple majority to substitute it, then you substituted it. Now your substitute is the main motion.
Well, I'm
Then
sorry,
you
we don't
vote
have
on
a
the
policy
motion.
tonight to try it out on.
So there you go. That's how it works.
How dare
And
you?
the
So-
Oxford comma will always be.
Oxford comma is just standard. That's a non-debatable motion.
Substitute, again, Joel's question is, where does the substitute motion fit in this hierarchy right here? A substitute is right between amendment and postpone. It really operates as an amendment, if you will, but you're really replacing the original motion because it's a substantive change. That's the difference between them.
And I think if there is going to be a substitute motion, it should be distributed to the board prior to the meeting.
In the written language
I
that you
can't
want,
see
the
that.
change of language.
Yeah.
But you don't always know if that's going to happen. Sometimes things surface in discussion that then leads someone to say, I want to change something. So I don't know that we can say
I
that.
just don't see a major shift happening in the meeting, you know?
But it would be allowable.
It's allowable, it is in order, and that's the proper way to dispose of a substitute versus the main motion. And that's what's tripped us up a little bit. So I think it's a point well taken, and the board could decide that they want a written, and that's your protocol for that you could decide to do that. But I think if you follow the protocol, a substitute might be in order where there is a substantive change needed, and the will of the board is we want to change that. And the minority position of the board mean, no, we don't want to do that, but the majority, we do want to substitute that out. It is in order, it is allowable, and it may not always be timely to have it in written form prior to a board meeting. So again, great point. You can choose to do whatever you want to do with that, but I would maybe default to what Board Member Bateman said. There are times when you want to substitute the whole thing. You do want to change it, and having it pre-written, I don't know that would solve all of those issues, from my experience. Okay. Other questions on precedent or order of priority or motions? Substitute versus amendment. That was one of the biggest things. Again, when I did my research for that training, I was like, and it was so fun. When I shared that, board members were like, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. We've been doing it wrong. I understand why it's awkward. That was kind of the aha moment, and I had probably 5 or 6 board members come up to me and just say, that makes so much sense, thank you, that really helped us. So hopefully it'll help us here too.
With the adjournment part,
Yeah.
it used to be that we would just a majority vote, yay, nay,
Yeah.
and now we do the singlet.
That's a roll call to go into closed
To
session.
close session.
Okay, so that, anytime you adjourn, you don't have to do that, but when you go into a closed session, then you do.
Correct.
And that's state code, that's not a
Okay.
Robert Rules of
Okay, I
Order
was
thing.
wondering what that, okay.
And that the state auditor also put out some guidance on that, clarifying what's in code, that it should be a roll call vote anytime you go into an executive or closed session. Great question. Okay, I think this is just kind of what I just talked through, the protocol for handling motions. Board Member Jones, I was going to put in Board Member Smith, but I thought that'll be even more corny. Or Johnson, I should have used Johnson. No, Jones. But I move that we pass whatever. I second the motion.
We outlaw pink swig drinks from any study session.
I move to adjourn.
Okay, so right there. Okay, so yeah, I think that was really a good. The original motion had no second. So a new motion of higher precedent was now in order. I move to adjourn.
We're eating early today.
So then you would need a second. You would need a second, and then simple majority, and the meeting's adjourned. That was kind of fun. I like that. So anyway, this is just again a protocol for handling that little role play there was awesome. When a question is called, so when you call the question, 2/3 majority vote has to pass call the question, and what that effectively does is end debate. So if you're tired of the discussion and you make the motion, I call the question, and that is seconded, Then, if that's called and seconded, that is in order, and then you take a vote. When you vote, simple majority, or excuse me, 2/3 majority, that ends debate. So that would be a vote of 5 board members to end debate. And then once debate is ended, then you go back to the motion, the main motion, and you dispose of the main motion.
But it's different if you have an amendment and you call it on the amendment.
Correct. Okay. All right. I think that's all I wanted to hit here. A couple of things to keep in mind. This is something I think communication is a challenge for all of us, and oftentimes because we're listening to respond and not to understand. And so one of the points here, listening for understanding, to truly understand what someone's saying, why they're saying it, where they're coming from, so that they're seen as something that helps us debate the motion in an authentic and real way. Focus on the merit of the motion. Sometimes we may or may not like the issue that's been moved or seconded. We may not like the person very much on any given day. But focus on the merit of the motion and try to separate that from individual personalities and or the issue at hand. I know that's a difficult thing, but something just to keep in mind. Motives are difficult to ascertain, especially with difficult, high emotional, multifaceted, complex human issues. That is what you deal with all day, every day. That's why the work of a board is so difficult. But that's also why it's also rewarding. So when we're trying to ascertain motives, I think a good rule of thumb is most people are, their intentions are good, unless proven otherwise. It's difficult to ascertain motives. Decorum, kindness, and respect, even when others don't do that, is a currency that I think I have seen this board use many times. And it's something that I know I strive as I meet with difficult individuals or have debates with people on a variety of fun things. Decorum, kindness, and respect, that's a currency we need to continue to give away. At times, each board member is voting in the minority, and that's uncomfortable. Some of you have voted in the minority for extended periods of time, and then others find themselves in a minority, and it's hard. So just keep that in mind. These are just a couple of things I thought were helpful. What I've seen over my 29 years with, I went back and counted all the board members I've worked with. I've worked with 37 different board members and 7 superintendents. And these are things that truly effective boards, I think, strive to do. We're imperfect. We have moments, and I have them as well. But really great board members and great boards do these kind of things. Other than that, we got the handout. Any other questions? What else can I do to help or support?
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's great. We'll convene for board meeting at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Rob. Very good. Hey, you need a drink? You've been talking for like an hour and a half.